Hey, welcome to part 3 of this short series on using a Python-based tool to augment TransX's implementation of escape burns, particularly those involving low-thrust engines. And just to recap quickly, in the previous 2 parts we went through an exercise to demonstrate the standard TransX usage of executing an escape burn for powerful space vessels such as the Delta Glider and the XR2. And in the second part we went through an exercise in showing where TransX begins to break down in terms of its capabilities when we start reducing the thrust capabilities of the vessels executing the escape burns down to something perhaps a little bit more representative of what is actually practical using current technology. In this particular episode, I basically now want to introduce a Python-based tool that we can use to help with executing these escape burns. It's not a standalone tool. It's designed to work in conjunction with TransX. So basically, it uses the TransX information, puts it into the Python widget calculator, and it tells you when, a number of things, the most important one being when you should start executing the escape burn, and how long you should run the burn for, how many seconds. The basic scheme that we are going to use is, whereas TransX assumes that we execute the burn pointing in a fixed direction, so a direction that's fixed in absolute space, we're going to use a method where instead of doing that way, we're going to have the vessel always point exactly along the prograde vector, so that as you apply thrust, you are always adding energy to the spacecraft in an efficient manner. It may not be the most optimal way of doing it, but it's a good way of doing it. And it certainly avoids the scenario of being driven into the atmosphere because of an angular difference between your prograde orientation and your thrust vector. Now, I've thought about whether or not people will be interested in the mathematics behind this, and yeah, I'm sure that some possibly may be interested in the mathematics behind it. But the better way of doing this, I think, is just simply to use the Python widget. And so this part is going to be about a basic implementation of the widget. And it's going to copy the previous scenario in the second part of the series, where we had a relatively low engine thrust of the Delta Glider, where it had produced 32,000 newtons of thrust rather than the standard 320,000 newtons of thrust. And again, we're going to pick up from the point where we had got our Delta Glider into a 300 by 300 kilometer circular orbit, and we were about 3,200 seconds away from the time to execute the burn, at least according to the TransX view of the world. In practice, because the engine thrust is lower, we need to start the burn sooner. Now, the Python tool that I'm going to show is, I'm going to make a reference in the video to where you can download it from GitHub. But I'm going to use, for the purpose of this video, a version which is a bit more streamlined and contains a little bit less text. The one that you can download from GitHub has got some background, some descriptive text, and some equations and stuff. So it's a bit more informative about what's going on under the hood than what you're going to see here. This is just basically going to be a bare bones presentation of the usage of the tool and the basic information that you need to provide and how you actually use the outputs from it. So without further ado then, let me just get the tool up. Basically, the widget is a Python script, Python program if you like, and it is presented here in something called the Jupyter Notebook. So when you see this thing reference up here, it's the Jupyter. It's a way of viewing the Python code. And if you install Python on your machine using a standard setup from setup package from, say, Anaconda, then you'll get the Jupyter Notebook and all of the other ancillary bits and pieces that you need to run this straight away as just the default settings in the download. Jupyter Notebook is basically an easier way of working with these tools. It saves you having to grunge around with text files and text editors and so on. It's if anybody has used Mathematica, it functions a bit like that. It consists of a number of code cells which you run independently. So I'm just basically going to assume that you know something about Jupyter Notebook. I'll just run through very quickly as I'm going through and tell you what I'm doing, but I'm not going to explain a lot about how you actually run the Python code in Jupyter Notebook. I can assume that you're going to read that. The first thing we need to do when we run this code is to execute this first block, which is to load up all the packages, the basic standard tools that Python needs to solve the problem in hand. And these are a thing called NumPy, SciPy, Math, and a specific thing from SciPy which solves first-order differential equations. So sitting behind all of this in terms of the math, we have some differential equations that we need to solve, and this is the tool that actually runs. This is the code that we use to solve those differential equations. Okay, so we load that up by hitting Shift Return, and if we go back up to that cell, you get a 1 in this thing, which shows that it has now been loaded. Now below that there are a bunch of functions which I've written which are needed by the program, and to get the program to recognize that these are indeed loaded, we hit Shift Return again, and it loads those functions. I'm not going to go through and describe what they do. They're just part of the widget, and you get a 2 here to show that it has been loaded. Now we come on to the business end of things. We need to load the tool up with a number of things that are specific to your particular scenario. And most of these things I think I've done already. We need a gravitational constant for the Earth, and this is this thing called mu, and it's equal to g times m, where m is the mass of the Earth. So the mass of the Earth is this is the number that comes out of the orbiter configuration files if you look them up. And G, if you look in the orbiter, I think there's an orbiter PDF in the installation package for orbiter. This is the value of G that it uses. So we use this. The product of these two things is the value of Gm or mu that orbiter uses for the Earth. So that's great. So this describes that we're going to have a gravitating body called the Earth. And since we're leaving Earth on a Hohmann transfer to Venus, and we want to execute an escape burn at Earth, that's the right thing to do. If we were leaving from Mars, executing an escape burn from Mars, then instead of the mass of the Earth, we would put in the mass of Mars. Similarly, if we were executing an escape burn from Venus, we would put in the mass of Venus, and so on and so forth. We also need to let the Jupyter, let Python know something about our vessel and where it is. It's in an orbit with a radius of 6,671 kilometers. Since we're using SI units in this thing, so it's 671,000 meters. We have an effective exhaust velocity of 40,000. This comes from Burn Time Calculator. If we just go over to Burn Time Calculator, sorry for losing the Python code as I select orbiter. We have an engine ISP of 40,000. This is the value that we're using. Let me just get this back up again. Okay. We have a mass fuel flow rate. For the standard Delta glider, it is 8 meters a second, and that's the current setting in here, but we are now using 0.8 kilograms per second. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I need to change the engine settings using IEAT MFD once again. But that's the number that we want to use. And we also need to know the mass of our vessel. We can open up the scenario editor. We can go to the propellant, and down here we get the total mass of the vessel, which is 14179.15. So that's the value that I want to put in here. I need to know the mass of the vessel, 0.15 kilograms. Okay, so if I'm applying thrust, that thrust is only going to be effective to the extent that we know our mass. If we are more massive, then we need to use more fuel and burn for longer. If we have less mass, then we need to achieve the same more, but we need to run the engines for a shorter period of time. So the Python needs to know how much we weigh immediately prior to the start of the burn, which is our best estimate is 14,179 kilograms, give it and some change. And the final thing that we need to put in is the final velocity that we will have once we are a long, long way away from Earth. And this basically comes back from our TransX maneuver plan. Technically, it's the square root of the sum of the squares of prograde outward and plane. It's what's often called the Euclidean norm of the velocity vector. But it comes out to be 3,315.067 meters per second. And that's called V infinity, or V inf in Python, and that's the number we put in. So I now load that in by hitting Shift Return, and that information about our current orbit is loaded into the machine. Okay, coming back to Orbiter very quickly. Let me just load up IEAT MFD again, and just as before in the previous part, I'm just going to set the engine thrust down to 32,000 newtons, which, if we go back to burn time MFD, shows that the mass flow rate is 800 grams per second. And if I just get that up again, the Python code, that is the value of the fuel flow rate that we are using in our calculations of our burn. Now, the way that the widget works is that basically it's doing a route finding calculation. So it's like all route finding calculations, Newton's method and the like. You need to have a reasonably good guess as to what the starting value is. And we know that from our previous run, then the estimated time for the burn is of the order of 1560 seconds. So in this next cell, basically I put in my guess as to how long the burn should take. And that's pretty much all I do, 1560 seconds, and then I hit Shift Return, and it comes up with the solution. That's pretty much all there is to it. The duration of the burn will be 1,665 seconds. The amount of dV that I will apply will be 3,946 meters per second. And if you look over at TransX down here on the left-hand side, it's saying 3,693 meters per second. So no, we actually need to burn another 250 meters a second in order to enter into our hyperbolic escape orbit. When we finish the burn, the periapsis of our hyperbolic orbit will be 7,330 kilometers, not our current orbital radius of 6,671 kilometers. And this is an important distinction, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. And we need to execute the burn 726 seconds prior to the arrival at the periapsis of the hyperbolic orbit. And when we finish the burn, we will actually have an altitude of 10,000 kilometers, or sorry, an orbital radius of 10,000 kilometers. So we will have moved about 2 to 3,000 kilometers away from Earth while we execute this burn. So just to recap, we've got basically a 20-minute burn. We're going to burn just under 4,000 meters a second. We're going to lift our periapsis up by around about 600 kilometers, 500 kilometers during the course of the burn. And we need to start the burn 726 seconds before we get to the periapsis of our required hyperbolic transfer orbit. And that's pretty much it. So we are currently 2,500 seconds away from periapsis, according to TransX. This is this number down here. And we have about 1,500 seconds to go before we get there. But before we get there, I've got a few things to do. So let's just run through those quickly. The first and probably the most important thing is to adjust the PE distance. Now at the moment it's set to our current orbital radius of 6,671 kilometers. This no longer works for us in this usage of TransX. What we need to do, instead of putting 6,671 kilometers, we need to actually put in the orbital periapsis at the end of the burn, so 7,330 kilometers. So I'm just going to basically go enter, and 7730 point, I think it was 15, sorry, we're working in meters, so 150. And let me just go back and check those numbers. 733, sorry, I'm wrong, to do it again. 73015. Check it again. 7330.51. Still wrong. Okay. 0.51. Okay. So that's an important first step. We have to put in the right orbital periapsis in this periapsis distance. It no longer refers to the periapsis of our current orbit. It refers to the periapsis of our final state orbit, which is the yellow dotted line that we want to be on. But although we're now currently way down here at 300 kilometers above the planet, by the time that we have finished the burn, our periapsis will have lifted from 300 kilometers all the way up to 7,331 kilometers. And we have to take account of that here. Now, the next thing that we're going to focus on is we are going to require our burn to execute always in the prograde orientation. And I could use the standard prograde autopilot in the Delta glider, the default one, but I prefer to use the one in Pursuit MFD. So let me just go through that again. Load up Pursuit MFD, install it from Orbit Hangar if you haven't already got it on your machine, and then set the pitch, roll and yaw to 0, which they all currently are, and then press hold. And the vessel will now orient itself in a prograde orientation with wings level to the Earth. So you might wonder why it's rotating around in this orientation. If we go to the surface HUD, then you can see that basically it's got wings level to the Earth, which is a slightly different way of orienting the vessel, but it achieves the same end. So long as the chevron here is pointing in the middle of the circle here, we are pointed prograde. Now I use Pursuit MFD simply because I find that Pursuit MFD is a better autopilot for attitude control. You can use the inbuilt one, but it's not quite as accurate and you don't get quite as good results from it. So now I'm holding fixed with respect to that. you will have noticed that I will actually have burnt some fuel in order to rotate. If I want to be finicky, I ought to go back and take account of the fuel used because it has reduced the mass of our vessel. So I'm going to open up Scenario Editor again, go Edit, Propellant, and you can see that my mass has now gone down a little bit. So let me get up the Python code again, and I'm going to update my mass, which is here. It was 14179.15, it's now gone down to 14179.07. So I've used, well, I don't know, what's that, 70 grams of fuel to do the orientation. I'll hit Shift Return to load it, and then I will go Shift Return in the next cell to produce and update the results. And now I've got a slightly updated view of the world, and my duration of my burn has probably gone down a fraction of a second as a consequence. My orbital periapsis is still at 7330.51 kilometers, which is what it currently is set at, so I don't need to change that at all. And the duration of the burn is now the number that I'm going to focus on. How do I get the burn to run for exactly 1665.33 seconds? Well, I use burn time MFD. So let me get burn time MFD up. And let me go back to the Python code. I'm just, rather than just flick around between the screens, I'm just going to load this into here, I think. Yeah, that's better. So I've just copied the results out of Python into this yellow sticky, and so I can just focus on these numbers a bit without flicking between screens so quickly. Right, I want the burn to run for 1665.33 seconds, and the burn dV is going to be 3946.877 meters per second. Okay, so let me put in a dV amount which is 3946.877 seconds. The estimated burn time according to burn time calculator is 1.667 seconds, so it's about 1.5 seconds out of whack with the Python calculation. What is going on here? Well, as it turns out, the target delta, or the amount of delta V that's produced up in this, the target delta V does not exactly tally with the estimated burn time. So even though when we burn, it burns for 1.667 seconds, we're not going to burn exactly 3,947 kilometers per second of fuel. We're going to burn something different. So to overcome this, I have to go through a rather excruciating process of playing around with the burn time and with the amount of dV such that my burn time matches the duration of the burn. Because I wanted to drop down a second or two, I need to take off a little bit of dV. So I'm going to go down to 3945, and that's dropped our burn time down 1 second. So I'm going to lower it even further, 3943, and that's probably good enough for this particular exercise. Now the estimated burn time is 1.665 thousand seconds, which to within the amount of precision that's displayed here matches our plan. Okay, so now what have we got? We are in the right orbit. We have set the PE distance to the right value to match that of the Python escape burn plan. We are oriented in the prograde direction and fixed there using pursuit MFD, and we played around with burn time MFDs to make sure that the burn time that we're going to run the engines for is exactly 1,665 seconds, notwithstanding the fact that the delta V doesn't quite match. We don't require it to match because burn time MFD's calculation is a little bit off. I don't know why, but it is. So long as the estimated burn time matches, we're good to go. Now, the last thing I need to do is to time warp forward to 726.5 seconds before the burn, and then I execute the burn. So now a little bit of time warp to get a bit closer. Let's just go down there, 10x, yep, and time to periapsis is 1,800 seconds. When this gets down to 726.5 seconds, then we begin the burn by pressing the burn button on burn time MFD. Okay, and let's go back and do 100x because it's going to take still going to take a while to get there. Getting close. Down to 10x. Alright. So now my time to periapse, which is the number I'm focused on. Forget the begin to burn, doesn't really matter. No longer a relevant piece of information. Time to periapse is down to 761 seconds. When this gets down to 726.51, I begin the burn. So just a bit more. When it gets really close, I'm going to go down to 0.1x so that the time to periapse will count down in 0.1 increments. And we're getting very close now. So I'm gone down to 0.1 times warp speed. 726.5 is when I will begin the burn. And burning. And back to real time. So it's a fairly, it's not a particularly difficult way of setting up the burn, but it is a little, you have to think about what you are doing. You're not guided through the process in quite the same way that TransX, the standard usage of TransX would require that you do. Once you get familiar with the technique, it's actually pretty straightforward, and it's actually very accurate, as we're going to see in a little while. The things that we're going to focus on are, well, in principle we should focus on the relative inclination, but we started out with an inclination error of 0.004, and it's going to stay that way, and if we wanted to sort that out, we should have sorted that out before we started the burn. And if we use fuel to do a small plane alignment maneuver, then we would have to take that into account in terms of the mass reduction in the PyCap code. We would have updated the mass in the assumptions here, loaded that back into Python, rerun the solver, and produced a slightly different escape burn solution. But it wouldn't have made much difference in this particular case. The other number we want to focus on is delta V. By the end of this burn, this should be very close to 0. In the previous run of this, where we used a reduced thrust from the Delta Glider's engines, we had a fairly substantial 450 meters per second correction. When we end this burn, we should find that basically our correction is at the order of 0.1, 0.2 meters per second. So a huge reduction in the amount of delta V fixing that we need refining that we need to do at the end of the burn. And the semi-major difference, if you recall, last time we did this was 4 degrees in error by the time we'd done some fudges with the delta V and finished the burn. This should be very close to 0 degrees. We should be almost exactly in the correct orbital orientation by the time we finish this burn. So we still have 1500 seconds on the burn. This is too long to sit around and watch paint dry, so I think a little bit of time warp is oriented. Again, we're going to get up the time warp widget, and I'm just going to go up to 30x and see if we can get through this burn just a little bit faster. And we'll see the semi-major difference slowly count down to 0 as we go through this, and it all looks very odd and very awkward to begin with. And you wonder what the hell is going on with this thing. So we're down now to 800, about a minute away from the end of the burn at this time warp. And you can see that the semi-major difference is steadily counting down towards 0. The delta V is about 1600 meters per second, and you see that there's a difference between the target delta V up here and that reported by TransX over here, but that will come into agreement, exact agreement, by the time we finish the burn. So we'll keep on doing this. We've got about another 50 seconds at this time warp to go, and we'll just watch things steadily unfold. You go through this burn and you think, well, what the hell is going on here? This cannot possibly be right, but it is. So coming down to 36 seconds left for this time warp, 700 meters per second to go, and we are nearly at hyperbolic escape, coming down to real time for a little bit. We've now escaped from Earth and we're just finishing off the last 540 odd meters of the burn. Back to 10x. A little bit more to go. Coming down to the last bit. And we'll go back to real time, 50 seconds left. Semi-major difference is down to 1 degree. The delta V is down to 110 meters per second. So we're already doing considerably better than TransX, but it will get better yet. You can see that our periapsis is now lifted up to 7,300 kilometers, and it will finish by the end of the burn. It will be at 7,331 kilometers, which is what our target periapsis radius was. 50 meters per second left on the burn. This is all automatic, hands completely off. Burn time MFD will cut out at the right time. 10 seconds left to go. Semi-major difference still counting down to 0. 10 meters per second left on the burn. And we are done now. Delta V difference is 0.5 meters per second, and our semi-major difference is 0.004, which is about 1,000 times better than the 4 degrees error that we had previously. Now, I can just use a little bit of RCS, linear RCS, just to tidy this thing up a little bit. So I'll just go and hit 6 a few times to finish off the DV on the burn, and then 3 or 1 in this particular case, just to get the semi-major difference down a little bit, and then we'll just finish off with a little bit of 8 to do a plane adjustment as much as we can, and that's about as good as we're going to get, I think. Yeah, that's as good as we're going to get it, because we had a 0.004 degree error to start out with. We just haven't been able to eliminate that. So there you are. That's the basic usage of this tool. I will leave a link in the notes and also in the video to show where you can download this tool from, and you can probably want to watch this one or two times to work out what's going on. And if you use the tool, then you can go through this exercise yourself and implement it. But you can see that our actual escape trajectory now overlaps precisely with the hyperbolic trajectory that we require to get onto our Hohmann transfer orbit. Great. Next time we come back to do this, we're going to go do this 2 more times. Probably there'll be 2 more parts, 1 for each time. So we'll go through this whole exercise 2 more times. Each time we will now reduce the thrust by a further factor of 10. So the mass flow rate will drop down to 80 grams per second, and then finally we'll drop it down to 8 grams per second, and we'll see how we get on with that. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode.